SapientsFandom.com. Fandom homepage. Fandom homepage. Sapiens in Nobis Wiki. Sapiens in Nobis Wiki. We sat down with Mr. Krabs, Clancy Brown, at NYCC 24. 2 minutes 13 seconds. Elapsed time. 44 seconds. Seconds. 0 of 2 minutes. 13 seconds. We sat down with Mr. Krabs, Clancy Brown. 2:13. Personal information. Born, May 30th, 1653, Madrid, Spanish Empire. Died, October 18th, 1736, aged 5 days, Toledo, Spanish Empire. Father, Felipe IV. Mother, Queen Consort Isabel. Children. Rodriguez II, King of Spain. Peter, Viceroy of Germany. Duchess Consort Isabella of Bavaria. Alexander, Governor-General of New Granada. Sophia, Governess-General of Florida. William, Governor-General of the Spanish Netherlands. Pope Clement XIII. Political information. Positions: King of Spain, King of Naples. Duke of Milan, Duke of Parma. Duke of Burgundy, King of Portugal. Holy Roman Emperor. Roman Emperor, titular, inaugurated, January 11th, 1672, reign. January 11th, 1672, to September 11th, 2001, predecessor, Philip IV of Spain, successor, Rodriguez II. Rodriguez I, 1653 to 1736, also known as Rodriguez the Stoppable, was the King of Spain. He did not lose many wars, or battles that he commanded. He was monarch of many of the major powers of Europe, withstanding vastly superior coalitions. He was the King of Spain, from 1672 until his death, and King of Portugal, from 1687 until he died. He greatly expanded the Spanish Empire, with his conquests leading it to its peak. Rodriguez I was born as Gran Infante Rodriguez de Asturias on May 30, 1653, as the eldest son to his father, Felipe IV. During his birth, Pope Innocent X, who was helping Queen Consort Isabel give birth, stated the thread of fate is fickle and balances on the blade's edge between the sublime and the eternal. Inconstant, they are the whims of fate. He will be born, and the moon trembles with fear for him. Who he is, I do not know, but God tells me that a man born into a royal house on this day will one day make this decaying kingdom into a mighty empire. His glory will change the balance of power in Europe and forever alter the destiny of Spain. Military training. Rodriguez had military training in the Pyrenees Mountains, where Rodriguez of Asturias was taught by a spectacular general, General Andalo Genocidio Orina. Orina trained Rodriguez of early guerrilla warfare, turning Rodriguez into a spectacular military general. Unfortunately for the Gran Infante, Rodriguez did not practice much naval warfare, and was mainly taught tactics on how to adapt to the environment and various strategies on how to counter an enemy. He was taught to attack first if there was no other choice. Marriage. He married the daughter of a Galician noble, Garcia de Santiago de Compostela, when he was 15 years old. First child. They had their first child, Infante Rodriguez, on October 15, 1671, when Rodriguez was 18. On January 11, 1672, Rodriguez's father, Felipe IV, died of tuberculosis, and so, Rodriguez I became the King of Spain at 17 years old, with Queen Consort Garcia assisting him in his early rule. This made their son, Infante Rodriguez, into Rodriguez of Asturias. This triggered a palace coup, and a powerful faction of Galician nobles seized power and proclaimed Queen Consort Garcia the regent of the state. The Franco-Dutch War. Rodriguez, early into his reign, had been involved into a war known as the Franco-Dutch War. First Battle of Cantabrico. The First Battle of Cantabrico began in November 19, 1673, led by Spanish Admiral Gutierre Manantial Blanco, against English Admiral Edward Lawrence Arbitra. It was the first of many bloody battles, being the largest that Europeans had ever seen. Most of the battles were centered near the coasts of England, Spain, and France, but some were on open sea. The battle was fought right off of the coast of Gijón, with the Spanish using their many galleys. Blanco's plan was to get as close as possible and rain havoc on the English troops from the mizens, masts, and fighting tops of the ships. From there, they would let the Spanish seamen board and seize the ships using wooden planks. However, Arbitra's plan was to use the ships for transport, to land in Gijón and defeat the Spanish on land. The Spaniards had 380 ships, with around 100,000 seamen, while the English had over 850 ships and 49,000 seamen, most being very experienced men. Under Blanco's supervision, the Spanish ships quickly massacred the English crew and seized many of their ships, of course implanting their ensign on each one and removing the English ensign. However, Edward Arbitra was bombarding the Spanish ships, destroying many of them. Blanco led his fleet away from the coastline and surrounded many of the English ships. With the English fleet surrounded, much of their navy retreated to Bordeaux, but of those that survived, such as Arbitra's ship, the National Arbitra, made fierce resistance, in which few fled. Of the majority that were surrounded, they were either destroyed or seized by the Spaniards. Eventually, the National Arbitra was the last ship remaining, and it fled to the English port of Southampton to rebuild. The Spanish had over 205 ships destroyed, with 509 captured. However, they had lost over 44,000 men in the battle. The English had lost 90 vessels in combat, mostly captured, and 46,000 seamen dead. This resulted in the Second Battle of Cantabrico having the English severely undermanned and underexperienced. Second Battle of Cantabrico. On December 5, 1673, Admiral Gutierre Blanco arrived on the coast of Cornwall to meet English Admiral John Etcherman Salvica. However, Salvica was a military genius, hence the actions that were made in the battle. The Spanish had 740 vessels, mainly vessels that they seized from the First Battle of Cantabrico, with 89,600 seamen. The English had 250 galleys, and 50,000 seamen. They also had 16,000 Royal Marines, who were divers who swam under ships and poked holes to sink them. They were mostly decentralized, with no commander, but they would also swarm ships in groups to destroy them without being undetected. They were very costly in experience and money, and so they were only used in dire situations. In this battle, almost all of the Royal Marines were used. They were the most sophisticated piece of military technology at the time. Salvica had heard of Blanco's strategy due to Admiral Arbitra, and preferred distanced battling. He ordered the English to fire with anything they had, even gunfire. Luckily for Blanco, he had decided to watch the battle from afar, which had likely saved him from the Royal Marines. The Spanish ships were crushed by the Royal Marines, who were undetectable from the ship, due to many of the Spanish vessels being destroyed. Blanco had ordered a retreat. Salvica had decided to adopt a similar strategy to the First Battle of Cantabrico, and encircled many of the Spanish fleets while they were retreating. Many were sunk, but Blanco was saved by a vessel. By then, the fleets were over 30 kilometers from the English coast, and Salvica had decided that it was pointless to chase the Spanish fleet any longer. The English had lost 150 vessels and 40,000 seamen, along with 4,000 Royal Marines. However, the Spanish had lost 650 vessels and 78,000 seamen. Third Battle of Cantabrico. The Third Battle of Cantabrico began on April 1, 1674 in the central part of the Bay of Biscay. Spanish Admiral José Juvón Rossumber faced English Admiral Edward Lawrence Arbitra. The Spanish had around 300 ships, mainly carracks, with 40,000 seamen, while the English had around 450 ships and 80,000 seamen. The battle was one of the least bloodiest of the battles of Cantabrico, as both the English and Spanish sailors had low morale. The Fourth Battle of Cantabrico began on April 19, 1674 on the coast of A Coruña. It featured Rodriguez I, who had recently taken control of the Flota Personal del Rey, against French Admiral Cartran Carolina Despancerque de Chartres, a famed French admiral, along with his brother, General Querentot Carolina Despancerque de Chartres, a popular French general. Along with them, they brought other minor French generals. The Spaniards had around 300 ships and 100,000 men, while the French had 800 ships, 200 for transport, and 600 for fighting. They had a total of 130,000 men, 90,000 being seamen, and 40,000 being land forces. Rodriguez had little experience on naval combat, and began moving his fleets towards the French transport, and according to French sources, unleashed a wrath of fury against General Querentot's army located in the transport ships. In that first move, around 180 French transport ships were sunk. In retaliation, Admiral Cartran moved his galleys toward Rodriguez's ship, and had shot it with a cannon. Rodriguez was forced to flee to the town of Pontedum, around 20 kilometers eastwards from the battle site. The French had lost 250 ships, 180 being transport ships, and 70 being galleys. Along with this, they had lost 36,000 land forces, and 80,000 seamen. The Spaniards had lost 20 galleys and 20,000 seamen. Siege of A Coruña. With General Querento's landings at A Coruña, he ordered his 4,000 men to siege the city on April 21, 1674. They surrounded the city, being prone to many ambushes. They also had gotten a steady stream of supplies and men to reinforce the city. The French suffered many ambushes during the siege, but also got supplies to cancel it out. The first supplies came on May 1, 1674, along with 2,000 men. However, they were prone to various ambushes led by General Andalo Genocidio Orina. The ambush came from the trees surrounding the city, and the French forces were forced to collect wood to build more defenses, which led them more prone to ambushes. By the time the next supplies came on May 13, 1674, the French forces had been reduced to 1,500 men. The next supplies had brought large amounts of wood and a total of 5,000 men, forcing General Orina to act quickly. He brought his 2,500 men to use constant hit-and-run tactics, which greatly wounded the French, killing 3,550 of their men and injuring 1,780, leaving the French at 1,160 men by the time the next supplies had came on June 9. These supplies had brought mainly 400 men and 50 cannons, causing the city's walls to fall on June 19, 1674. The French suffered a total of around 5,500 casualties, and the Spaniards had lost 50 men. After the siege, General Orina's 9,000 men met General Querento's 1,500 men at the Battle of A Coruña, Battle of Toulouse. Rodriguez had 15,500 troops, against the French 14,500. Rodriguez spotted Louis XIV, and so he hid his armies behind buildings to strike the French troops by surprise. When the French turned the corner, the Spaniards strike, killing 700 Frenchmen almost immediately. The Spaniards had only 2 men injured during this strike. After that, the Spaniards appeared from the buildings and began firing at the French. However, this was less successful, as 500 Spaniards were killed, and 900 injured, while only 300 French were killed and 400 wounded. Rodriguez I had managed to strike Louis XIV's shoulder, forcing the French troops to retreat. While the French were fleeing, the Spaniards managed to kill 2,000 French. However, once the river was crossed, the French stopped retreating, beginning the first face-off at the Garonne River. By the end of the Battle of Toulouse, on June 18, 1674, the Spaniards had 500 men killed and 1,100 men injured, leaving them at 13,900 men who were able to fight. The French had 3,550 men killed, and 3,600 men injured, leaving them at 7,400 able-bodied men. The first face-off on the Garonne River, the Frenchmen had fled across the river and began going westwards. They had also destroyed the bridges in Toulouse. The French had hid in the woods for 3 nights, but they were now willing to face Rodriguez again. In contrary to Louis XIV's orders, west of Toulouse, on the Pont d'Albanois, the French 7,400 men met the Spanish 13,900 men. On June 21, 1674, the French quickly began firing at the tired Spanish troops. The Spaniards were demoralized and lost many men, but the French began their flee to Paris d'Outre. The Spanish had lost 2,700 men, with 300 wounded, leaving them at 10,900 able-bodied men, while the French had only lost 500, with 25 wounded, leaving them at 6,850 men. Siege of Ludo. Ludo was a Spanish fortification that was built just south of the Pont d'Albanois. The Spanish had gotten reinforcements, bringing them up to 12,500 men, but the French, led by General Querento Carolina Despain-Cercroix de Chartres, were coming with 32,000 men to siege the fort on December 15, 1675. Offers to peace. By 1674, the French had suffered many casualties against Rodriguez I, and offered him peace, in exchange that he would get a choice between unlimited bacon but no games or games unlimited games but no games. Reforms to Spain. Rodriguez I was focusing on a series of reforms, which are now known as the Rodriguezan reforms. In these reforms, the Spanish economic prosperity was sabotaged by increasing taxes to inhumane amounts and nearly destroying foreign trade by raising tariffs to ridiculous amounts. Rodriguez enforced these laws with brutal military rule, in which over 500,000 people in mainland Spain alone were executed for not contributing enough to the treasury, or avoiding taxes, bringing the Spanish population to 14.5 million from 15 million before the reforms. However, the reforms and military rule would not last long after his death. These reforms took 8 months to implement in 1674, from February to October, and guaranteed Rodriguez's ability to wage more wars. Commercial Proclamation of 1674. Hearing of the reforms Rodriguez made, the burghers of Spain started mass defecting to other countries. So eventually, in 1674, Rodriguez I was forced to proclaim that he would allow burghers to trade anything they wanted to, wherever they pleased. He also established separate tax rates for each product. This attracted large amounts of European burghers, from mainly France and Italy, who wanted to reinstate trade with the Qing, who had severely limited trade with Europe since 1636. Trade with China. In 1678, Franco, Spanish burgher Jean-Jacques Edouard Dominique François de Foix landed in the Chinese port of Guangzhou. Chinese told the Jean-Jacques,
你宁愿有无限的培根，但没有游戏，还是游戏，无限的游戏，但没有游戏。
Jean-Jacques didn't understand them, so he killed himself. Savoyard-Genoese War. In 1672, Savoy had launched an attack on Genoa, on which with Spanish support, the Savoyards were repelled. By this time, the third son of Garcia and Rodriguez, Pedro, was born. Pueblo Revolt of 1680. In 1680, the Guamers tribe had revolted near the Mexican city of Puebla, taking over the city. In February, the tribe stormed the city after having its spies open the east gate. The Spanish garrison was shocked and surrendered quickly, boosting Guamers' morale. Mexican reinforcements. Hearing of this, the Crown of New Spain sent 8,000 troops to deal with the rebels, but after many ambushes on the way, only 5,000 arrived to fight the rebels, and were defeated north of the city, making Mexico City vulnerable to attack. In his desperation, the Viceroy of New Spain begged Rodriguez to come over and crush the rebels. Spanish reinforcements. Rodriguez and 12,000 elite troops arrived on the coast in early May, and arrived near Pueblo by mid-June. At first, Rodriguez was crushing the rebels and besieged Pueblo by early July. However, he poorly set up his formation and the tribes crushed his army, leaving him with 500 men. Spain fled to a small fortified village, but was besieged by the tribes. Eventually some defectors opened the gates, and the Spanish were defeated and Rodriguez was captured. End of the war. Hearing of Rodriguez's captivity, remaining generals assembled some 700 crack cavalry and desperately charged into the Pueblo formation, and managed to save Rodriguez by exclusively attacking the POW wagons. After rescuing their monarch, they retreated, and signed a humiliating peace in November, 1680, granting Pueblo province to the Guamers tribe. Long after the war, Rodriguez's son, Rodriguez II, would avenge this defeat in the Second Spanish-Guamers War and exterminate the Guamers tribe. War of the Reunions. In 1683, the French had declared war on Spain, hoping to gain some lands. Rodriguez I met the French king at Perpignan, in which the French army was destroyed brutally. He then had captured the French Mediterranean coastline, in which the French sued for peace. Spain had gained former Navarrese and Aragonese lands from the war, which would be kept until the end of the Rodriguan era. Subjugation of Portugal. In 1686, the Portuguese king had died without an heir. Wishing for glory, Rodriguez I had ordered the Spanish Armada to blockade Portugal until they surrendered. However, the Royal Navy of England had broken through the blockade, which led to Rodriguez going to Lisbon and declaring himself King of Portugal in 1687, taking with him vast amounts of territory and wealth. After Portugal had been taken, Rodriguez I had been beginning to be referred as Rodriguez the Unstoppable. He began reforming the Spanish Armada, which was very outdated, hence the blockade failed. To celebrate their victory, Garcia and Rodriguez had a daughter, Isabel. When they had found out that Rodriguez was beginning to be called Rodriguez the Unstoppable, they had a son, Felipe, in honor of Rodriguez's father. 9 Years' War. In Europe, the year 1688, the English, French, Dutch, Austrians, Prussians, Russians, Danes, and Poles had formed a coalition against Spain. Rodriguez led the Spanish Armada to Britain, where fierce battles were fought, but in the end, the Spanish were destroyed, but the British were crippled, and sued for peace in 1695. Now that the Spanish Armada was no longer preoccupied, Rodriguez made landings in Bordeaux, while his son, William, led the Spanish armies through the Netherlands. Infante Rodriguez also carried multiple operations in the Baltic Sea, seizing the Danish Straits and the Prusso-Polish coastlines. By the end of the war, In 1697, after the Treaty of Perpignan, Spain had gained some Caribbean colonies in the Lesser Antilles, British Guiana, French Guiana, which was awarded to Portugal, the Netherlands as a subject, with Suriname being part of Spain proper, and Austria, Prussia, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth indebted to them. They had permanent unpaid access to the Danish Straits. After the war, Garcia and Rodriguez had their last son, Alejandro. Wars of Ceuta. In 1694, supported by the British, Morocco had attacked Spanish Ceuta. This sparked a series of campaigns, where mostly prisoners of war were used to gain land in Morocco after many bloody battles, amounting to over 1 million casualties. This would end in 1727, after Spain had gained large portions of northern Morocco and colonies in the Western Sahara. First Portuguese revolt. In 1696, several Portuguese rebel groups arose in Lisbon, Porto, and Algarve. However, these rebels were insignificant and Rodriguez sent his weakest troops to counter them, in which the Spanish succeeded. Queen Anne's War. Spain was not very involved in the Queen Anne's War, and they just funded the British and French in exchange for some territory of the vanquished. In the end, the French lost, and Spain was awarded some of the territory of New France. The war lasted 11 years, from 1702 to 1713. Coronation as Holy Roman Emperor. In 1711, following the death of Joseph I of Austria, the electors had elected Rodriguez the Unstoppable as Holy Roman Emperor due to his prestige. His coronation was held in Madrid, in the newly built Palacio de lo Imperable. The palace, by opinions of tourists and historians, is one of the greatest buildings ever built by a nation during the age of absolutism. Alliance with France. After the many years of peace, Spain had gained closer ties to France, and particularly, Louis XIV. Rodriguez had even married his son, Pedro, to the eldest daughter of Louis XIV. Hulish Rebellion. The Hulish Rebellion during 1712 to 1713 was inspired by the nationalistic beliefs of Rodriguez. Many Latin American settlers did not agree with these nationalistic beliefs, and hence revolted. After the revolt was crushed, Rodriguez the Unstoppable imposed stricter laws, which led to a migrant crisis. Second Portuguese Revolt. The Second Portuguese Revolt was in 1712, in where the Portuguese rebels stretched from Porto to Sevilla. The major battle of the war. Rodriguez had flanked the rebels in Huelva, and encircled them in Sevilla, killing the majority of their forces, and then wiping out the remaining of the Portuguese rebels. Latin American migrant crisis of 1713. In 1713, due to the harsh laws imposed on the Spanish colonies in the Americas, many colonists settled to Spain. Spain was becoming overpopulated, and so Rodriguez had to impose a new law, the Penal Proclamation of 1713. In 1713, Rodriguez the Unstoppable had sent the Spanish prisoners to assist the conquistadors colonize lands in the Americas. This led to a rapid acceleration of colonial growth, which indirectly may have influenced the Latin American Wars of Independence. Seventh Ottoman-Venetian War. In 1714, war broke out between Venice and the Ottoman Empire again. Rodriguez led his armies to Tunisia, where they captured several territories, and the war ending during the Battle of Alexandria. The Venetians gained Cyprus and some other lands, while Spain gained some ports in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf for Portugal. War with Andorra. Rodriguez, boldened by his success, would invade Andorra, at that time led by Juan. Rodriguez made a deal with France, Austria, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and the Ottomans that they could each get some Andorran citizens forcefully migrated to their land if they fought Andorra with him. Thinking the war would be easy, they all accepted. However, Juan of Andorra, during the battle, refused to move, and stayed right where he was, and he personally cut down hundreds of thousands of coalition troops. This is why he is known as Juan the Based. After the battle, Rodriguez was captured, and exiled to Brazil for 8 months while the Andorrans tried to figure out what to do with him. During this period Juan the Based ruled effectively all of the French, Spanish, and Portugal empires, while in Brazil, Rodriguez is reported to have said, "I hate it here. I have been sent to Brazil and I hate it here. Oh, why must there be no gay men in Brazil? There are so many in Spain. In my home, my dick has been left alone for 8 months, all while that bastard Juan rules my empire. In fact, why have my subjects endorsed him over me? Why do they love him so much?" Today I asked one of my fellows here, one of the few homosexuals, what we can do. He said, "I do not know, my sire." It was at that point I realized, There is nothing we can do. By 1718, Rodriguez the Unstoppable was 65 years old, and had only 19 years left of his lifespan. European powers quickly jumped on this, as shown by the War of the Decuple Alliance, where they underestimated Rodriguez. War of the Decuple Alliance. Soon after this in 1724, Britain sues for peace, bringing every other nation with it. The aftermath of the war leads to the Spanish capture of Burgundy, expansion of Spanish Belgium, Milan and Parma, Rodriguez the Unstoppable becoming king of Naples and Sicily. Sharkey insisted he keeps the lands he got, but the war was removed, so it's up to Sharkey to make this make sense. Third Portuguese Revolt. In 1725, the Portuguese revolted again, and Rodriguez's son, Pedro, urged his father to not participate and put down the revolt for him in 1726. In return, Rodriguez offered Pedro a wish, and Pedro wished to be the king of an independent Burgundy, in which Rodriguez agreed reluctantly. Alliance with Austria. By 1726, the new Queen of Austria, Maria I, pledged to not attack any nations under the Habsburg dynasty. Hence, she offered Rodriguez the Unstoppable an alliance, in which he agreed, as he saw it as having another ally. Death of Louis XIV. In 1727, Louis XIV, one of Rodriguez's closest friends, had died at 84 years old. Rodriguez the Unstoppable had mourned for a few months, before a war broke out that caught his attention. Anglo-Spanish War of 1727. In 1727, the British Empire had declared war on Spain. They had wanted Spain to forgive their debts to Austria and Spain. However, Rodriguez and his allies, France and Austria, had once again defeated the Royal Navy, in which the Brits surrendered in 1729, claim to the Roman Empire. By 1730, the Ottoman Padishah was desperately trying to prove that he was the Roman emperor, so he awarded large amounts of money to who could prove that a man was the Roman emperor. In 1731, a poor peasant by the name of Algus Romulo Carlos Guillermo de Albarracin used the will of the nephew of the last Byzantine emperor, Andreas Palaiologos, in which he gave all his titles to Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Upon finding this out, Rodriguez the Unstoppable began an argument with the French king over which claim was more valid. Upon hearing of this, the French king published a document where Andreas had sold the rights to the Byzantine crown to the kings of France 8 years before he gave it to Isabella and Ferdinand. In addition, the Spanish monarchs never used the title, while the French kings had been using the title since 1494. Because of these two reasons, the French refused to recognize Rodriguez's claim to be the Roman emperor. However, Rodriguez disputed this, and disputed the French claim, saying that the Spanish monarchs had not known that they had been awarded the title, and along with that, Rodriguez argued that Andreas did not sell the title of Roman Emperor, rather a different title. Despite French protests, Rodriguez then adopted the titular title of Roman Emperor. Spanish-Algerian War of 1732. In 1732, Rodriguez the Unstoppable had declared war on the Ottoman vassal of Algiers, where he gained some lands in northern Morocco. Fourth Portuguese Revolt. In 1732, another Portuguese revolt had broken out. However, due to the low morale of the Portuguese at this time, the rebellion was crushed within days by Isabel of Milan. War of the Polish Succession. In 1733, the Russians tried to declare themselves an eternally peaceful empire, and only asked Rodriguez if they could please take Poland. I hate Polish Popol Polska Góram. He Russians are send Rodrigu a telegrammer.
Kill yourself.
Savoy Yard purchase of Milan and Parma. In 1735, Savoy offered Rodriguez the Unstoppable a large amount of money for Milan and Parma. As Spain had been indebted by warfare, Rodriguez agreed. Fifth Portuguese Revolt. In 1734, the Portuguese revolted. The heir of Spain, Rodriguez II, knowing that his father would die soon, requested to command the army and crush the rebellion. However, his father decided to take command of the army personally and simply instruct his son on the campaign. At first, the war was going great, with the Spanish crushing the Portuguese in North Portugal and capturing Porto. However, success was short-lived. The king got arrogant from his victories and was eventually caught off guard by a Portuguese ambush, during which he was captured and his army almost entirely exterminated. His son, however, managed to escape using a horse a soldier gifted him for the escape. On October 18, 1734, Rodrigues the Unstoppable was sentenced to death by the Portuguese rebels. The selected method was hanging. Rodrigues requested to ransom himself, offering over 1,000 ducats, but the Portuguese laughed it off and dragged him to the gallows. Rodrigues started panicking and wanted to at least say some last words, but the Portuguese were having none of it. Rodrigues said wait, hoping to buy time, but then the lever was switched and Rodrigues died. In Spain, October 18th is a national holiday, where people mock Rodrigues for being dumb and stupid. Rodrigues was one of, if not the biggest idiot of history, behind Michael Corribat. His era, the Rodriguan era, would mark a period of Spanish monarchs attempting to be as stupid as him, all the way until the Napoleonic Wars. He shrunk Spain to its least powerful, and changed the course of history forever. He accelerated the decline of Spain during his reign, and made it one of the weakest nations in the entire world. His children would reign to be the national jesters of many European nations, and some of his descendants still being clowns today. Famous quotes. They seem to love me enough to call me the stoppable one. I do it on behalf of my gay lover. Why do you honor me before my dick? They are the people achievements have. Haile Zakiv. This quote is seen as one of the first forms of nationalism in history. They say that nothing gold lasts forever. If that is true, why hasn't my dick been sucked yet? This quote was also an example of early nationalism. Napoleon used this quote in a similar manner, but referring to France instead of Spain. Oh, nations, feuds, and wars. May your sword cut down my dick. It is evident that Caesar, Alexander and Charlemagne could easily deal it a final blow. So you will be able to. This quote signified that Rodrigues was dominant, as he even himself, who was considered to be humble, compared himself to Julius Caesar. This quote has also been attributed to many other leaders, including Napoleon Bonaparte and Charles V. Are you surprised that we are the successors of my dick? We have gained global dominance, similar to it, and you, of all people, are trembling in fear. This quote was said after it was revealed that Spain was the successor to the Roman Empire. Again, it is a form of early nationalism. They called me stoppable, but they didn't know that only my dick with its almighty power could not stop me. This quote was the final words of Rodrigues the Unstoppable. It shows how religious of a society Spain was, even in the 1730s. I am unstoppable because my dick is on my side. This quote was in response to a Spanish civilian asking him why he was so sexually attractive. Again, it shows how religious of a society Spain was, even after the Reformation. I hate it here. I have been sent to Brazil and I hate it here. Oh, why must there be no gay men in Brazil? There are so many in Spain. In my home, my dick has been left alone for 8 months, all while that bastard Juan rules my empire. In fact, why have my subjects endorsed him over me? Why do they love him so much? Today I asked one of my fellows here, one of the few homosexuals, what we can do. He said I do not know, my sire. It was at that point I realized, there is nothing we can do. This quote is well known worldwide, as the Lament of Rodrigues. Many people know this quote by heart. The Spanish Empire, the primary nation that Rodrigues the Unstoppable ruled over throughout his entire reign. Felipe IV, the father of Rodrigues the Unstoppable. Rodrigues II, the successor to Rodrigues the Unstoppable. Pierre III, Rodrigues's son and husband who would rule Burgundy as an elector in the Holy Roman Empire. The Portuguese Empire, the secondary nation that Rodrigues the Unstoppable ruled over throughout most of his reign. More information. Community content is available under CC.